So here we are at the end of the semester. I hope that everything is going well for everybody. I know I've been hit by a really bad cold this last week, and so feeling like it's a little bit hard to keep up, but also really enjoying this semester and looking forward to the conclusion of it all. So this week, or for this final conclusion section of the course, you've been asked to do a few things. So one is to view this PowerPoint. The second is to read the Sensoy and D'Angelo chapter 10. Then there is to reflect on the Power Flower that's posted and to participate in the final forum. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of those things in this PowerPoint, as well as just talk a little bit about our final assignments that we have to get in. So the first assignment that will be completed are the group wikis. These are to be completed on Monday, April 10th. And so what that means is April 11th in the morning, you will no longer be able to access them. So probably around 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, I will close them down and you won't be able to access them. So whatever you want to finish up, wrap up, you should be doing that on Monday. Just a reminder that the focus of the mark for these is around process. So I want to see how you've enriched it from your first wiki, made changes in your second wiki, how you've tried to understand the questions there. So if they're not if they're not thoroughly maybe as complete as you would like them to be, that's not really what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is the process and the attempt to answer those questions. So as soon as those are done, I'm going to start marking those, and I'm hoping to have those marked quite quickly, and so that you'll be seeing those marks definitely within a week of that April 10th deadline. The second assignment that needs to be wrapped up is this forum participation assessment. Now this should be submitted on, or sort of the due date, the wrap-up date for that is April 12th. That's the last day that the forums are kind of expected to be completed, but you do actually have until April 14th to submit that. Now, I thought this was just going to pop up, but it's not, so we will go here instead. So the criteria for that assessment are listed in the assignment description. And they have to do with answering the posted questions, staying on topic, being respectful, and then either making connections to course material, personal experiences, and or asking insightful questions. Now, I made a change to this later on in the semester. So initially, I was going to assign all 15 marks. I made a change to this, and now you have the choice of giving yourself a self-assessment mark out of 10. So I am going to be asking you to submit that self-assessment mark through the assignment function that will be available starting April 12th in UR courses. So you will go in there, and either you can link a Word document, or you can just type directly in there your self-assessment mark out of 10, and maybe a few words about why you feel that mark is the mark that you should get. I will assign the mark based on, or the other 5 marks, based on my assessment of your participation in the forums. Now, I asked you to identify 3 posts for me to base my assessment on. That's particularly important if you decide not to do a self-assessment, and you do have that choice. You don't have to do a self-assessment. If you don't contribute a self-assessment, I will assign a mark out of 15. So hopefully that's clear enough with that change. So that will be, as I said, submitted through UR courses starting on April 12th. Now the next, or the final assignment is the final assignment, which is due April 21st. And again, I should have just stayed here because it didn't pop up like I thought it would. So the final assignment has now been posted. There are 2 choices. So you can either do a response to the Leonardo article that's posted, or you can do a self-reflection on what you feel you have learned in this course over this semester. And there are prompts for you to address. If you have any questions about that, let me know. So that is due April 22nd. And so there's really no space in there for extensions because that's already due in the exam period. I need to have those in by April 21st in order to be able to complete my marking for those assignments within my deadline. So that's really important. So moving on from there, I wanted to just talk a little bit about a few ideas that were important for the semester that might contribute to your forum posts for this last concluding forum. So hopefully over the last few weeks as you've been working on your wikis, you really had a chance to think about the connection between power, identity, and oppression. That's what really this course is about. So it's about how who you are positions you in relationships of power. So how in some contexts that puts you in a more marginalized position, and in some contexts it puts you in a more privileged position. And it's really this relationship or these relationships that wiki assignment is trying to get at by looking at very specific aspects of identity and how those identities relate in terms of oppression, privilege, and power. A really important idea, though, when we're thinking about this and about the complexity of oppression and power is the notion of intersectionality. So this did come up earlier in the semester, although we didn't spend a lot of time on it. Sensoy and D'Angelo define it in one of the chapters that we read, and they define it as the term scholars use to acknowledge the reality that we simultaneously occupy both oppressed and privileged positions, and that these positions intersect in a complex way. So this is the notion that really nobody is completely privileged, nobody is completely oppressed, that power is dynamic and it's contextual. So in different moments in time, in different places, we experience these relationships to systems of power and oppression in different ways. Now for this final conclusion section, I've posted something called the Power Flower, which, oh, it did that again. So this is actually what we want to see first, which is a way, it's a tool that's sometimes used in popular education to help us think about our own relationships to systems of power and privilege. So I've described this in the document that I posted, but just to maybe talk about it a little bit more in case people are struggling a little bit with it. The way that this, or what this graphic is supposed to represent, are aspects of identity. So in the center here, we have different aspects of identity. So we have a racialized identity, we have an identity related to our education level, our biological sex, the language we speak, etc. These are all different aspects of our identity. In the outer ring of petals, we see the identity that we might think of as the dominant identity or the privileged identity. So if you're looking at identity based on your ability level, generally speaking, able-bodied people have more privilege, more power in our society than disabled people. So the inner ring of petals represents the marginalized or the oppressed identity. So for biological sex, we might think about males as generally having more power, females as generally having less power. In gender identity, we might think of people who are cisgendered, so those people whose gender matches the gender they were assigned at birth, those people as generally having more privilege and power, and transgendered people, so people whose genders identities don't match the gender they were assigned at birth, those identity as being as having less power. Now there are several blank spots on this diagram, and those are there as places that you might fill in other aspects of identity that are significant to you. So one example that sometimes people in my classes have felt is significant is this notion of geographical, where we grew up or where we live. Is that an urban setting or a rural setting? And so generally it's felt that people in urban centers, or that urban centers have more power than rural centers. Another kind of identity that we might want to think of is our relationship to colonialism. Now, I wasn't really sure exactly what to call this identity. I don't know, colonial identity doesn't sound quite right, but this is a little bit different than our racialized identity. So are we a settler? Are we a white settler, which is the privileged or more powerful position, or are we indigenous? Other aspects of identity that sometimes people have felt are significant are our profession. What kind of work do we do? Are we a professional? Are we a doctor, a lawyer, an upper manager of some kind, or are we working class? Are we more working on the front lines? Are we a service professional? Are we a cleaner? That kind of thing. And so generally, again, people who are in professional jobs are seen to have more power than people in working class jobs. And then family structure is another one that sometimes people have brought up. So we have the nuclear family, the family with two parents, as being seen as the dominant identity. Our society is more structured to support the nuclear family than it is to support the single parent family, for example. Now, all of these identities that we have intersect with each other. So we have, these different aspects of our identity, and they all impact how we experience power and privilege. So we know that, for example, not everybody who lives in an urban center is powerful. But if you are white, and if you are English speaking, and if you are a citizen, and if you are able-bodied, and if you live in an urban environment, you're more likely to experience more privilege and power than somebody who has those things and lives in a rural environment. But it's obviously a complex relationship, and it's not static. It changes over time. So for me, for example, as somebody who's English speaking, heterosexual, a citizen, a woman, somebody with a disability, I experience different aspects of my power and privilege, and sometimes aspects of marginalization in different ways at different times. Building on that, I've posted these reflection questions. So take a look. Where would you be positioned on that power flower? What does that show about your positionality? Does the way it shows up in that graphic mirror your own experiences, or are there some conflicts there? And then what are the implications that this might have in the classroom or in future work? So think about your position in terms of the relationships of power and privilege that the students in your classroom might have, and what might that mean? So this is one thing to reflect on when you're preparing to post in the final forum. Another thing to reflect on is the final chapter of Sensoi and D'Angelo. And these are some questions, or these are some things that they have at the beginning of that chapter. They ask, what now? So in order to build on this knowledge that we've been building about power and privilege and identity, they ask us to recognize how these relationships are being negotiated at both the personal and the public levels, to understand our own positions within these relations of unequal power. And so that takes us back to the power flower, right? And how we experience that. To think critically about that knowledge and about knowledge in general. So what kind of knowledge is more powerful? Whose knowledge is more powerful? Who gets to make statements that are seen as true? Which representations, we think back to those discussions of representations, which representations have power and which ones don't? And then how do we act on that in the service of a more just society? So I encourage you to read through that chapter. They have several scenarios, vignettes, where they think through some of these things and use some tools, some different perspectives, some skills to critically analyze different kinds of situations in relationship to social justice. And when you have done that, I would ask you to participate in the final forum. And in the final forum, I'm asking you to think about these questions. So after participating in this course, what do you see differently, or what do you understand differently? So this I'm associating with your head or your eyes. How are you thinking about things differently? What are you seeing? Has your perspective changed? Or maybe you want to talk about your heart. How do you feel about things differently? Sometimes we can't exactly explain it in terms of what we think differently, but is there anything you're feeling differently about having participated in this course? And then thinking about your hands and your feet going forward, what might you do differently? What might you do differently as a teacher if that's the direction you're going in, having gained this knowledge? So I look forward to reading your posts in the forum.